Good morning. Welcome to the Ethical Humanist Society of Chicago's Sunday morning platform. My name is Katie Merrill, and I'll be your moderator today. For those of you who are in Chicago, I hope you've been able to dig out as much as you need to and can now just enjoy the beautiful snow. For those of you who aren't in Chicago, I hope you'll send your weather sympathies to people in Texas and other places. I think they need it more than we do. As you can tell, we're still meeting virtually because it's still not safe to be together in a room. And maybe that day will come soon as people get vaccinated. If you're eligible to be vaccinated, I hope you'll do that. We usually start with some comment or thoughts about humanism or a little bit about our community. And today I wanted to read just a really brief piece out of the Humanist Manifesto number 2, which came out in 1973. There's been 3 of them, and this is the one from 1973. The world community must engage in cooperative planning concerning the use of rapidly depleting resources. The planet Earth must be considered a single ecosystem. Ecological damage, resource depletion, and excessive population growth must be checked by international concord. The cultivation and conservation of nature is a moral value. We should perceive ourselves as integral to the source of our being in nature. We must free our world from needless pollution and waste, responsibly guarding and creating wealth, both natural and human. Exploitation of natural resources, uncurbed by social conscience, must end. I picked that just because of today's topic, which I'm super excited about. We're going to get behind the scenes with some enthusiastic and professional zoo professionals from the Reid Park Zoo in Tucson, Arizona. We're going to hear from, we're going to meet some pet ambassadors from the zoo, courtesy of their ambassador support people, who are 2 young women. Brittany Caldwell is originally from a small mountain town in Southern California and wanted to save animals from a very young age. She began her Reid Park Zoo career in 2013 as an apprentice keeper, caring for the animal ambassadors and flamingos before learning the kitchen and assisting animal care supervisors with projects. After her apprenticeship ended, she was asked to join the education department. 7 years later, she believes staying at the zoo was one of the best decisions she ever made. While she never expected zoo educator to end up being her new dream job, she's proud to be a voice for animals and conservation, as well as follow in the footsteps of her retired teacher parents. She owns 2 rescue cats and a desert tortoise and fosters cats and kittens before they find their forever homes. Brittany will be joined by her colleague, Molly Koleczek. Molly has been an education specialist at Reid Park Zoo since 2018. She has always been interested in animals, teaching, and learning, and found this role to be a great fit to combine those interests. She has worked at other accredited facilities, including Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago, Virginia Aquarium and Marine Science Center in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and Mote Marine Laboratory in Sarasota, Florida, in various roles, although her oddest job was probably aboard a dredge vessel in Louisiana, observing for marine animal interaction and sorting through trash that was pulled up in the dredge. She has a rescue dog named Blue and enjoys spending every minute she can outside with Blue. She's excited to have a taste of home to present and speak to fellow Illinoisans today. And before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit more about the zoo. Its mission is to, quote, create inspiring memories for all by connecting people and animals to ensure the protection of wild animals and wild places, end quote. The zoo was founded in 1965, originally with a collection of birds, prairie dogs, farm animals, and a few squirrel monkeys. And it now has a 24-acre campus that houses hundreds of animals and naturalistic exhibits and annually hosts more than 500,000 visitors. Reid Park Zoo is accredited by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. To be accredited, zoos must undergo a thorough investigation to ensure that they have met and will continue to meet ever-rising standards. Those standards encompass animal care, veterinary programs, conservation, education, and safety. The Association of Zoos and Aquariums, or AZA, requires zoos and aquariums to successfully complete this rigorous accreditation process every 5 years. So they have to just keep working at doing a great job. For those of you who have been with us before, you know that we have themes. Our programs fit into several themes, whether it's science, technology, ethics, civics. Today is one of what we consider an intergenerational program, and we welcome several of our Sunday school families are going to be part of an experiment today. We're going to have them some of the children are going to ask questions directly to the presenters if they have questions. So we'll see how it goes. We'll wish us all luck. Per usual, if you have questions, you can put them in the YouTube chat. And if they are about an animal that we're engaged with in real time, we'll try to take them then. If they are more conceptual or broader, we might hold those off till the end during the Q&A. And so with that introduction, I want to invite Molly and Brittany to join us. And I will stop talking. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that introduction. So this is Brittany and I'm Molly. So we'll be your presenters today again from Reid Park Zoo. And so we are wearing masks right now because we are in close proximity. But for the majority of the program, you'll only see one of us on screen and we will be safely distanced so we can take our masks off. But we wanted you to see us both to start. But right now, Brittany is actually going to go get our first ambassador animal guest while I kind of give an introduction to our topic today. So like Katie mentioned, we're talking all about kind of zoos and their roles and what zoos kind of do. Lots of people, so Brittany is now gone, so I will take off my mask. So zoos have really 4 main components of what we focus on. Actually kind of 5, I guess you could say. So the first one is, of course, animal care. We have lots of animals in our care that we take great care of. We try to provide the best welfare we can for our animals in our collection, and that welfare is always changing. So we always constantly monitor every single animal in our collection so that they have the best welfare they can. Now, welfare is on kind of a continuum. You can't specifically measure it, but you're constantly observing to make sure that the welfare is the best it can be for an animal. So zoos, you might have thought of animals coming from the wild. You might, if you're older, you might be familiar with bars and just kind of looking into an animal. But zoos have really come a long way. And so we really have adapted our habitats for animals to reflect their natural habitat. And very, very few animals come from the wild in zoo settings now. Most are going to be bred from other zoos. And there's a big, big program that we can talk about later called the Species Survival Plan of how we matchmake animals to make sure that the collection of animals in human care is genetically diverse and viable. So animal care is a really big component of what zoos do, but the other 4 are going to be research. So zoos definitely have their own research projects in-house, but we also partner with organizations around the world in various capacities, whether it be through monetary donations or financial resources provided to those. It can be sending our own scientists to the field to do research and things like that. So research is a really big one. Another one is going to be conservation. Conservation is really trying to protect the wild animals and wild places. That's in our mission. So any way we can support conservation initiatives, we are going to try to do. And that can be through supporting research organizations or partners as well. And we'll talk about one of our partners with an animal guest a little bit later too. Another big component of what zoos do is education. So I am an education specialist here at Reid Park Zoo, and we really try to educate guests about all different issues. So of course, the natural history of animals that they're visiting or seeing, different facts about the animals, maybe where our animals came from, but also all of those other things that zoos do. So why do we have animals in human care, how we got them, our conservation mission, everything like that. We always try to educate guests about why animals are important, their jobs in their habitat. If you didn't know, animals do have jobs to do in their habitat, and every animal is important. So we'll meet a couple animals as well to talk about their importance too. And the last thing that zoos are here for that we talk about is recreation. So hopefully, if you go to visit a zoo, you're going to go and try to have a fun time. No one goes to visit a zoo and thinks that they're gonna be mad when they leave. They're gonna have a fun time. We're here for recreation, for community building, and be a community partner for those as well. So we'll talk all about those things. We call those our Zoo 101, getting to know a zoo. And while Brittany is getting our animal guest, I'll just point out where we are today in our building. So here behind me is our treatment center of our animal health center. Right now, I am in a classroom or the education gallery of that classroom. So there's this big window right behind me that looks into our main treatment center. And the majority of our animals can come to this health center, but what about those ones that are larger, that can't fit? We have elephants here in Tucson, we have giraffe, we have rhinos, so those animals are going to be way too big to fit in our double doors. But if we can't bring an animal to the health center, we're going to do everything we can to take care of it in their off-habitat area, what we call their night house. So their night house is going to be where we can perform any procedures we need, any checkups, ultrasounds, things like that. But for the majority of our animals, the small ones, up to and including our grizzly bears, the grizzly bears are going to be probably the biggest thing that can fit in our health center. They can come in here and get their annual checkup. All of our animals receive at least one checkup a year or formal checkup from our full-time veterinarian. But the animals also get checkups every day from their zookeepers, the animal care supervisors, and our vet is always here. If she's not here, she's on call, and she's available if any of our animals have an issue come up. Now I'm going to see if anyone's near, so our lights can come back on. They are motion activated, so I just want to see if I can get someone to turn those on. 632, anyone near the health center? So pardon my interruption here. Are you able to walk into treatment to turn the lights on? Thank you. So while we wait for those lights to turn on, again, they are motion activated. So here at the zoo, we also try to make sure we have the most green practices we can. The most green practices we can. So conserving energy and having recycling on grounds, conserving water, especially here in the desert of Tucson. We definitely want to conserve water. Everything we can to do to be sustainable here at the zoo, we're going to do. So you can see our lights turned on. They are motion activated. You might see some of our animal care staff walking back and forth from this building, but pointing out some things in our treatment room. You can see those big lights hanging from the ceiling. Those are going to help our vet and animal care staff pinpoint an issue or an area on an animal. If they're checking them up, if they're getting a dental cleaning, if they're checking anything on their body, they can use those lights. And they also have cameras in them. So we can broadcast anything going on in our health center on a couple TV screens in this room that you can't see right now. We can broadcast that. So other people can also see the procedure being done. You can see our treatment table in the back, that big long metal table, along with this blue gurney. So we have those to be able to also check up on our animal, provide any oxygen they may need, things like that for general checkups. We also have a surgery suite here in our health center, and that's going to be for larger procedures, anything that has to be absolutely sterile or super clean to prevent any chance of infection for anything that has to go on. So luckily, we haven't had to use the surgery suite very often here. We try to use preventative medicine and preventative care to make sure our animals have the highest chance of staying healthy, but sometimes things happen and that does have to come into play. Now, our first guest is almost ready, so if we don't have any questions coming through, we can prepare to see her. We're going to be observing a training session that Brittany, our other educator, will be handling, and I'll be talking through. So what I'm going to do is actually going to switch our camera view to the floor. And I see we don't have any questions, so I'll just remind everyone, you can ask questions throughout. You don't have to save them to the end. We'll periodically pause for any questions. So let me just switch our camera. You're going to get an up-close view. All right, and she'll be on screen in just a moment. There she goes. She's ready to roar and get her training session on. Here we have Larry. Larry is a southern bald ibis, and what's happening today is she is getting a training session from Brittany. As educators here at the zoo, we work with our animal ambassador collection. So the smaller animals that can be trained to be handled, can be trained to safely come out in this type of setting. We are not going to be the ones that work with like lions or giraffes, anything like that. That's going to be exclusively the zookeepers. But our ambassadors are really a great resource to connect people with wildlife and have that up-close encounter with them. Now, how is training or this type of training session related to animal care or animal husbandry? We are going to be training animals to kind of do things that will help us check up on their health. So that is called husbandry behaviors. It might not look very fancy or impressive, but we think it is. Larry is a very smart bird, and so by training her to touch her beak to this target stick that Brittany is using, we can ask her to move in different directions. We can make sure her eyes are working. If she is not able to touch the target stick or she keeps moving, that might be an indication that she needs a checkup or she needs her eyes looked at. If she's not willing to train, that is totally okay. We believe in the philosophy of choice and control for our animals as much as possible. And by giving our animals the choice to train, to come see you today, that's great for their welfare. They know that we're not going to ask them to do things that they don't want to do. They never hear the word no directed at them. And so Larry has the choice to walk away from Brittany anytime she wants, but most of the time she is motivated to stick with her trainer, whoever her trainer is for the day, and stay with her and do what is asked of her, the behaviors. Now we see she just refused that behavior, which is okay. She maybe want to explore. Brittany asked her to step up and she did not, and that's totally okay. We'll redirect her to ask for another behavior. You might hear Brittany saying the word good after Larry touches her beak to that stick. And that is what's called the bridge. A bridge can be that verbal cue, or it can be a clicker, it can be a whistle, and it's really any sound that connects their completed behavior with their treat or reward that's going to be given to them. And Larry's reward today are going to be waxworms and small pinky mice, and that's going to be her main food source. So again, if Larry chose not to participate, she would not be deprived of this food. She would just get it later in the day. Now, we just had a couple people walk past. You may have seen them through the window. And sometimes Larry does get distracted by new things, and that's okay. We just work through her kind of quirks and her oddities to make sure she has the most positive experience. So another term for this type of training is positive reinforcement, because again, they never hear the word no directed at them. Now again, why is this training helpful? Why do we do it here at the zoo? This is going to help us take care of their health care. If an animal chooses to participate in this training, in this type of husbandry training, we can build on these behaviors for different animals so they can participate in their own health care. Now, we might go to the doctor, and sometimes that might not be very pleasant, but we know it's for the best for our healthcare, and we can kind of work through that. It might be a little nerve-wracking, but we know they're not going to do anything that's going to harm us. It might hurt, but it's not going to harm us. We can't tell our animals that, or they're not going to understand that. So if they have to come to the veterinarian for a checkup, we can reduce their stress by having them participate and choose to participate. We may see Larry choose to enter her crate to go back to her habitat. And by having animals trained to voluntarily crate, we'll see if she wants to do it. That severely reduces their stress instead of having to catch them up and bring them to the health center on our own. Anything we can do to make sure our animals have a positive experience is what we're going to do. I think Larry is about ready to go back to her habitat, and so I'll come back on screen and ask some questions. So you'll get a view of my legs there before I switch over again. All right, so hopefully you guys enjoyed that training session. We're gonna have a live question join us, so that's super exciting.
So why is the bird's beak so long?
That's a great question. So why is Larry's beak so long? So one thing that kind of distinguishes an ibis is that really long beak. So Larry is a southern bald ibis, and so she's going to have that characteristic feature. Other ibises, a scarlet ibis is a little smaller than Larry, but they still have that long beak. And birds have different beak structures because it's kind of how they've adapted, and it really goes along with their food source. So Larry, her way of getting food, or what would be her way of getting food in her natural habitat, would be to probe through dirt. She is a grassland animal, so she has a very sensitive beak. There's special features in her beak that kind of act as little feelers and sensors that can sense bugs underground before she even sees them. So she can pinpoint where a bug is in the ground and kind of poke her beak down and grab it up. So that long beak helps her kind of dig farther and farther in the ground. That's one reason she has a very long beak, is to get her food. We have a question did you have another question, Layla?
No, thank you.
Okay. All right. So we have a question in the chat. How much school or training did I have, or did we have to go through to become a zookeeper? So that's a great question. I am not a zookeeper, but for zookeepers to go through their schooling, most of the time, zookeeping is a very competitive field. And so lots of people want to be zookeepers, but there's usually only maybe a couple facilities in each state, if not more than one. So it's a very competitive field. Most zookeepers have to get a bachelor's degree, which is a 4-year college degree, and they can get that degree in a variety of subjects. So there's zoology, there's animal science. A lot of zookeepers get psychology degrees along with that. Animal behavior is very important to know, so psychology really helps them with that. You can get, if you're specializing in different things, you can get like marine biology degrees. Certain schools might have even more specific degrees, but a 4-year college degree is pretty much essential now if you want to be a zookeeper. Lots of zookeepers go on to get higher degrees, so master's degrees is common too, but 4-year college degree is pretty much what you'll have to get to become a zookeeper. Another question in the chat is, what outdoor facilities do you provide for birds that can fly? So that's a great question. Larry is a flighted bird, and so she has her own habitat, and I can talk about her story too. But she has a large habitat that is enclosed, but it's large enough for her to fly from different perching to different perching. So she spends a lot of time up on higher perching and flying different ways. And she spends a lot of time on the ground too, because that's where she will forage or look for her diet and her food. We also, here at our zoo, and it's common for other zoos as well, to kind of have mixed species aviaries. So they could be indoor or outdoor, but they are usually larger spaces or larger rooms for animals to just fly about. So that's going to be different facilities. So our aviaries are outdoors. So that's a great question. Now, yes. So talking about Larry, I mentioned she had a kind of a special story and how she became an ambassador. She actually came to us from the San Diego Zoo in California with, I believe, 2 or 3 other bald ibises. And she was put into our aviary with those other ibises. But her keepers and staff and even guests noticed that she was very people motivated. And aviaries are kind of a unique situation because you're right in with the animals, and it's great to get that up close view. But Larry was kind of taking it a step too far. She was very people motivated, coming right up to people and even kind of jumping or stepping up on strollers or walkers. And so we knew that's not a safe situation for her. So she was brought to our animal ambassador collection, where she was what's called behind the scenes, where typical guests cannot see her. And so most of our animal ambassadors live behind the scenes, and they're only brought out to meet people through virtual platforms now or in person. So she has a pretty unique story, and she loves her job of being an ambassador. We spend a lot of time socializing with her, so she still gets that social aspect, and her zookeeper. So she has a very, what we think is a happy life for her because of her behavior. All right, I don't see any more questions in the chat. So what I will do is get our next ambassador to talk about our next topic of roles of zoos. So just give me one moment. I'm going to kind of step off screen. This next animal, some people might be a little frightened about, but it's part of my job to kind of dispel that fear. So just one moment. You'll get a great view of our health center there. And we'll have our guest. So here with me, I have one of our ambassador corn snakes. So this is Blake. He is a young male corn snake. And so he can get a lot bigger than this. He's growing very fast. He does have a clutch mate, his sister, that hatched the same time as him, and she's about half his size. So he has grown very fast with us, but he can get to be maybe triple this size, maybe double, 50% bigger, and he'll get quite a bit wider too, so a little girthier. But what we like to do with snakes is educate people. So lots of people might be a little scared or a little squeamish of snakes, and that's totally okay if you are. But we like to remind people that snakes have a very important job in their habitat. Cobb here is a corn snake, and he would live, his range is throughout the eastern coast of the United States, in different fields and sometimes even like marshes. But people might not really want him where he is, but he has a great benefit to his ecosystem, and that has to do with his food. Corn snakes, along with most other snakes, are going to be carnivores, which means that his diet is going to be other animals. And his type of snake specializes in rodents, which are going to be mostly mice. And so mice, you might know, have lots of babies. They are very prolific animals. And so without snakes and other predators of mice, there would be way too many in their ecosystem and in their habitat to sustain that population. And there's a really fine balance of predators and prey, and mice taking up too many resources. So without that balance and snakes in a habitat, we would have way too many mice on our hands and rodents all across wherever snakes inhabit. So Cobb is just one example of the importance of snakes. Here in Tucson, you guys don't have to worry about this in Illinois, but if we have anybody non-locally with you watching, you might know that we have rattlesnakes in our desert as well. And people may be scared of rattlesnakes, which is totally fair. We never want to go up to rattlesnakes because they are going to be venomous. And so we encourage people, if they ever see a snake, out on maybe a hike, or if they're outside, to just give it its space. If a snake sees you, they're not going to be motivated to kind of hurt you unless they think you're going to hurt them, or if you startle them. So if you're ever outside and you see a snake, just kind of step back, give it its space, go in another direction, or kind of cross it far enough away so you don't have that chance. But we encounter sometimes people that are very wary of snakes, and sometimes will choose to dispose of them if they come on their property. But we always like to encourage people, if a snake is where it shouldn't be, if it's in your backyard, if you see it someplace it might be may harm you or your family, we always like to tell people to call the local authorities. So usually the fire department can take care of a snake if it's in the wrong spot, and we really don't encourage people disposing of snakes themselves. Some other things about snakes that are really cool are that lots of people believe that they don't have bones, because Cobb here is demonstrating how well he can move and how flexible he is. And many people believe they're just really bendy because they don't have sturdy bones. But believe it or not, they actually have more bones in their body than you or I do. And so they have so many bones that let their muscles attach along their spine and their ribs that help them move in those awesome ways. I will go on to questions. I see a couple in the chat. Cobb, I mentioned, is a young snake, and a question is, do you have any newborn animals right now? So I believe our newest newborn, Brittany might be able to correct me, is our young elephant, I believe. So we do have a young elephant. She's almost a year old now. She was born in April. So her name is Mackenzie, and she was born again last April. She is the third calf that we have here at Reid Park Zoo, the second one born at Reid Park Zoo, but she's the youngest of that herd. We do have another question in the chat. What's the biggest snake at Reid Park Zoo? That is probably going to be our female green tree python. She is very large, and she is one of the more dangerous animals, I guess, that the ambassador animal collection keepers would work with. They actually feed her with tongs. She is not venomous, but she could strike. So what they would do is strike for their food. So that's why we keep our zookeepers safe, by tong feeding them. And she's probably our biggest snake that we have. I don't see any other questions in the chat, and Brittany is just about ready with our next animal. So if you, I'll give you guys a close-up view of Cobb here, and then kind of walk off screen. You can see his awesome colors and his awesome underside colors as well. All right, and Brittany will be right with you guys.
All right, hello. Thank you all again for having us. And I am here with a much different animal than I had the last time. So Larry is now back in her habitat, and I have with me a western box turtle. So this is a species that is native to the western part of the US, as their name kind of implies. And it's one that can be found in a number of different places. So all the way down here in Arizona, up into Idaho, and into parts of the Nevada desert and states in between. You, over where most of you are probably watching from in Chicago, you have an eastern or ornate box turtle that does look fairly similar to our turtle here, but I believe the eastern box turtles tend to get just a little bit bigger than our western box turtles. Now, what gives them their name, we will get that light back on in a moment. What gives them their name of box turtle is actually a unique adaptation that not all turtles and tortoises have. So just underneath the bottom of their shell here, which is called the plastron, they have a specialized hinge. So their shell isn't completely stationary. It can actually close up like the lid of a cereal box. So if she were to get very startled by something, if she wasn't sure what was going on, if something passed over her head and she thought, oh my goodness, I need to get out of harm's way, she can do that just by tucking her legs and her head inside of her shell, and her shell will close up behind her because of all of her skin and muscles that are connected there. And that's, again, not something that all turtles and tortoises can do. So that is unique to box turtles. Now they can't close the back of their shell, but the back of their shell is very, very narrow. I'm going to bring her just a little bit closer here. So you can kind of see this back part here is very narrow. This front part here is much wider. It allows her to move around. So those front legs have a lot more mobility to be able to kind of walk around or swim as she needs to. And that is the side that she wants to protect the most, because that's where her head is. That is one of the most important things you need to protect as an animal, is protecting your face and protecting your head. So she can just tuck herself right in when she needs to. Now, I'm sure many of us have seen cartoons that would indicate that a box turtle can come out of its shell, or any turtle or tortoise. If they needed to, they could just pop right out of their shell and run. They cannot do that. So their shell is adapted to be attached to their body. So her spine runs right down the middle of her back here, and she can actually feel me touching her. So we're always very careful when we're working with our turtles, and when we do live programs where people do have the opportunity to touch some of our animals, we always ask that they be gentle, because turtles can feel you with all of the nerve endings that are in the top of the shell here. Now, one of the important things we talk about with our box turtles is going to be resource conservation. So where our Western box turtles come from, they do rely very heavily on a water source. They come from riparian habitats, which is the habitat directly along the water's edge. And that is something that here in the desert Southwest is a pretty precious resource. So making sure that we have enough of everything to go around is definitely important. And we want to make sure that we are conserving as much of that water as possible. So that way box turtles don't have to worry too much about where is safe for them to be able to find food, where they can dig a burrow to lay their eggs, and being able to travel back and forth using those riparian waterways. Now I will pause for just a moment and check and see the questions here. We do have a great question that is an important one to point out. What is the difference between a turtle and a tortoise? So turtles are predominantly aquatic, so most of their lifetime is going to be spent in or around the water, whereas tortoises are almost exclusively on the land. And you can see in their adaptations what they were built for. Our box turtle here is kind of a unique combination of the two, because they do spend a fair amount of time on land. They rely on the water, they need the water to survive, but they're not necessarily the best swimmers. So they're adapted to swim, they just don't do it very well. They spend a lot of their time just along the edges of the rivers and ponds. Tortoises, though, if they can avoid being in water unless they're soaking, they are going to stay out of it. They are going to float, but they are not good swimmers at all. Those feet are adapted for being able to walk. They're very stumpy, very hard on the bottom, and tortoises are very upright, so they can get their feet down underneath them to be able to walk, whereas turtles kind of scooch themselves along on their bellies. And let's see, any others? I'll pause for just a moment. Does she like it when you scratch her back? You know, she seems to enjoy it sometimes, maybe not all the time. We don't necessarily spend a ton of time doing that, because we don't want to put them in a situation where they start to dislike it. We want them to be totally comfortable in our hands. But sometimes, as we're just kind of gently touching something on her back, if somebody comes up and touches her in a certain spot, she seems to react positively to that. And because they can feel it, there are a number of turtles and tortoises who really do enjoy that. There are usually ticklish spots on their shells that they will like to rub on things. I have not found the ticklish spot on our turtle here, but someday we might. We'll have to see. And another question, let's see, are they different breeds or the same animal, or different animals altogether? I'm guessing we might be referring to either the different types of turtles or different types of turtles and tortoises. So with animals like this, we are discussing different species. And for box turtles, there are what we would consider subspecies. So they are both box turtles, eastern and western box turtles. They're not necessarily going to be found in the same areas, though, so they have evolved just a little bit differently from each other. They're not completely distinct, like, say, a sea turtle and a box turtle, but they are distinct enough that they are not going to be in the same group. There are a number of different turtle species out there, a number of different tortoise species out there, so they are, a lot of them are very, very distinct from each other, sometimes just based on where they are found in the world. Galapagos Island tortoises are going to be found only in the Galapagos in the wild, so they are a really cool example of island evolution, where they are in that one spot and they have stayed completely separate from everybody else for a very long time. And how do you know when she's happy if she's smiling all the time? It does look like she's smiling, doesn't it? I'll bring her a little bit closer here so you can see that smile. So turtles and tortoises have these really great beaks that are adapted for being able to bite into things. Box turtles are going to be mostly herbivorous by the time they're adults, so they will eat mostly plants. Occasionally, though, they can still eat meat, and here at the zoo, they get a little bit of a mixed diet of greens and meats. They don't have any teeth, so their beaks are shaped to be able to allow them to bite into things, to tear off pieces of plants as they need to, and to allow them to get it into their mouth so they can swallow it. Now, it's hard to tell, but she is fairly content. Part of our job as educators, as people who handle her, is to know based on their body language how they're feeling. She's not fully tucked into her shell right now. She's mostly a little bit sleepy because there's some noise around us, so she's kind of listening to that, aware of that. But she is not completely retracting into her shell, which means that she's not worried about what's going on. She's not, though, ready to explore just yet, so she's not completely out of her shell, moving around. If she were to start kicking her legs a lot, if she were to start kind of stretching and straining her neck upwards, that would be a sign to me that she's maybe not feeling super comfortable being held anymore. And how good is their eyesight? So their eyesight, I believe, is sensitive enough to be able to pick up certain colors because they need to identify certain foods in the wild that would allow them to know what they are eating is safe, what they are eating is a preferred food source. Since she is eating plants, she would need to identify which plants are the good ones to eat. And fruits are a particular treat for a lot of turtles and tortoises that live in areas where fruits might be found. So they need to be able to see fruit colors to know which ones are ripe enough to eat. And how would you know how good their eyesight is? You can sometimes test it. There are some zoo facilities that have target trained their turtles or tortoises, and we may not be able to tell exactly what colors they see in necessarily, but we do know that they can identify some different colors because we can train them to target to a green target stick or a yellow target stick. And over time, they will be able to pick up on exactly which stick they're supposed to touch because they can tell the difference of the color and know that they are being rewarded for touching the correct one. So that's kind of a cool thing that a lot of zoos are working on right now. And another question, does she have any siblings in the zoo? She does not have a sibling, but she does have a younger companion. So this is Pandora. She is our older of our box turtles. She's pretty much full grown at this point, so she's not going to get any larger than this. Her sibling, or her friend, who is not related to her, but we do kind of refer to them as being sisters since they live together. She is a little bit smaller and about almost 10 years younger. So she has a bit of growing left to do to catch up to Pandora here. We'll see how long do they live in captivity versus in the wild. So in human care, we do know that box turtles can make it into their 40s and sometimes a little bit older than that. It is very difficult to know how long an animal might survive in the wild. In order to track them from the time they are born until the time they pass, you would need to have very, very good records, somebody who's really dedicated and able to find that animal, or a team of people that can find that animal. So it is very tough to try and identify individuals in the wild sometimes, and to be able to get a reasonable number, because there are a number of different things that wild animals face that will change how long they live. Some animals can live a very, very long time if they're completely undisturbed and stay healthy, where some animals, unfortunately, of that same species may not. So we don't have a median life expectancy for them in the wild, because that is very tough to find. But in human care, I believe our median life expectancy for these guys is around their late 20s or early 30s, if I remember correctly. That's a good question. And I don't see any others. Oh, I do see another one. Do turtles socialize with one another? They can. So some turtles and tortoises are perfectly fine being around each other. Some of them prefer to be on their own. So it depends on the species. Box turtles can live socially as long as there is enough food and water. So they've got good resources and they feel safe. But if the resources are scarce, they may become territorial. So they may defend their territory to make sure that nobody else can take their food, take their water, or encroach on their space, and at least for a male box turtle, try to take their girlfriend. So male box turtles can be very territorial when it comes to breeding season. How big is her shell? I'll bring her just a little bit closer. So her shell does not fit in the palm of my hand. She is just a little bit bigger than that. I would say she's maybe about 6 inches long by 5 inches wide, just to give you an idea. And how do they deal with getting turned upside down accidentally? That can happen. So they can right themselves most of the time. It is a very dangerous position for a turtle or a tortoise to be in, though. They can dehydrate really quickly because they can get stressed out. And a lot of turtles and tortoises can store extra water in their bladders. So if they were to get turned upside down, they could lose that water because they stress and they urinate. So that would be a dangerous place for them to be. They would not want to stay there for too long, but they can take these back feet and kind of kick off and push to be able to flip themselves over in order to make sure that they are going to carry on their way and go back to what they're doing. And I think we have somebody who wants to ask a live question, so we will pause for that. Oops. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe not. That is okay. So if they do decide they want to do that, we will come back to them. Biggest predator for box turtles is probably going to be, I would say, some of our native canid species, so foxes or coyotes, which are not necessarily going to be a common predator of theirs because turtle shells can be very difficult to get through. Every once in a while, maybe a bobcat or a mountain lion, but usually the juveniles can get picked up by just about anybody. So birds of prey certainly can deal with them. Raccoons are very clever and can get into tortoise shells. So any number of different things. Sometimes their biggest threat is going to be humans. So something that we like to remind people is that there's wonderful, wonderful wildlife around all of us, no matter where we are. Sometimes you may have to go just a little bit farther to find it, but we always want to be very careful about how we are recreating in the wild spaces around us. These animals that we share our habitats with are going to rely very heavily on their environments being clean, people not disturbing them, not habituating them to being fed. So those are all things we need to remember as responsible humans to make sure that we are not contributing to any species decline or upset in their native spaces. What I'm going to do is slip on a mask here. So this next animal visitor that you are going to see is one that we are being extra cautious with right now. Neither Molly nor I feel as though we have any sickness or anything like that. We do check our temperatures every single day. But in order to make sure that we are being very careful with this animal, we wear these specialized N95 masks to not accidentally transmit anything to them. This is an animal that could be susceptible to the coronavirus. So to take extra precautions, we wear gloves while handling him. We wear masks anytime he is in the room, and he will be joining us in just a little bit. Now, as we finish up, as he is getting ready, I will bring our box turtle in one last time, so that way you can see her. Unfortunately, our camera does not have great focus close up, but hopefully you still get the idea of how awesome she is, how beautiful she is. These are really, really neat animals to get to see. You get to see some of her shell pattern there. Now, I am going to switch our camera over since our next guest is here. And it looks like he is already exploring. Okay, so Molly is adjusting our camera just so that way we can see as much of this habitat space as possible. This is a dwarf screaming hairy armadillo, and he earned every part of that name. It is a very big name for a very little guy, but this is a species that is one of the smaller armadillo species. So that's where dwarf comes in. And it's hard to tell right now. You might be able to see it as he moves a little bit there. He is one of the hairiest armadillo species too. Armadillos are mammals. A lot of times people think, are they a reptile? Are they a dinosaur? What are they? They are in fact a mammal, but he is a very, very hairy individual for his species. So he is kind of showing some of that off right now. And while we are tracking him, I believe somebody has a live question, and we are going to have them turn on their cameras for us. Hello. And if you are ready with your question, you'll need to unmute your microphone and then we can hear you.
Hi.
Hi. Hello.
What is your favorite animal in the zoo?
Oh, favorite animal in the zoo? I think it's different every single day. It's whoever's in front of me at any given time because they are all amazing. Phone, and then we can hear you.
What is your favorite animal?
What
is your favorite animal?
I think we've got a little bit of feedback going on there. Hopefully you were able to hear some of that. And I don't know if Molly has a different answer for what her favorite animal is.
Yeah, it can change a lot, but one of my personal favorites that I get to work with is Jovi here, our armadillo, and one that I don't work with in close proximity is probably our elderly female rhino. So she is very sweet that we get to visit from time to time.
And she is definitely a staff favorite too. And so is Jovi, actually. Jovi is very, very popular among all of our staff and a lot of our guests. So going back to his name, just to give you an idea of why he's called a screaming armadillo, since we've covered the other two parts of his name, he can scream when he is threatened. It is luckily something we have never heard here at the zoo, at least not from him, because he has never been in a situation where he feels as though he is going to be eaten, he is scared, anything that is going on around him is so frightening that he needs to scream to scare it away. That is something that they will use in the wild, though, to scare off predators. So if they cannot run away screaming at your predator, it's a pretty great way to startle them, maybe long enough to get to safety. And following up to the screaming capabilities of this armadillo, do armadillos make any other sounds? Some of them absolutely can. So some of them can make kind of a growling, chuffing sound. I believe some of them, when they are younger, can make some higher pitched noises, especially if they're trying to communicate with mom or dad. Typically, mom is the one taking care of them, so mom would be the one listening for any kind of trouble. But Jovi here is well known for that screaming capability. So he is going to be one of the only armadillos that does that, but others can make some other noises. We haven't heard too much of the growling, huffing sounds from him, but some of our previous screaming armadillos were very, very good at being super vocal and letting us know how they felt, especially when we woke them up first thing in the morning. We get a lot of growling from them because they were telling us they weren't quite ready to be awake just yet. Now, one of the things that we do like to cover with Larry, talking about how zoos participate in conservation and how we help animals around the world, we are partnered with a project called the Giant Armadillo Project. It is run by a fabulous researcher in South America who also works with giant anteaters and is helping to preserve and protect very critical habitat spaces for these animals. Giant armadillos are, believe it or not, about my size. So I know the way we have our cameras set up, it was probably tough to tell exactly how tall Molly and I are, but I'm just a little over 5 feet tall. And the biggest of the giant armadillos we know of can be 5 feet long and weigh over 100 pounds. So they are a really incredible animal that not a lot of people believed really existed. We don't know a ton about them. We're still learning about them. And the researcher in that project, the Giant Armadillo Project, is kind of the leading expert on that species. So as his partner, we support him financially with anything that he might need to be able to put specialized radio trackers on these armadillos, to set up camera traps to be able to monitor their burrows. They do dig a new burrow usually every couple of days. So being able to see who else is using the burrow is very important, seeing if any other armadillos come into the area, and also monitoring how they use their habitat. So by providing the funding that he needs in order to track these animals, in order to see what they're doing, he is better able to tell, especially the government of Brazil, where a lot of them are found, what needs to be done in order to try and keep them safe. And he works very closely with the local community, which is not something that we can do. He knows the people, he can speak with the people, he has connections with those who are native to the area themselves to be able to see what can be done to support them so that they can protect some of their spaces that they use, that the armadillos also use. Now I'll stop and check our chat here. How closely are armadillos related to other roly-poly protective animals like hedgehogs? So armadillos, Jovi's doing a great job of showing you the tunneling capabilities there. Armadillos are kind of in a category a little bit by themselves. I believe their closest relatives are the pangolins. And pangolins are an interesting animal that looks kind of like an artichoke with a tail, but armadillos are not necessarily super closely related to anybody else. We do categorize them or put them together with some other insectivores because they are insect eaters. So Jovi, armadillo, other armadillos, anteaters are all sometimes grouped together as insectivores, but they're not necessarily related to each other. And another interesting question that we do get, and something important to touch on, someone has heard that armadillos and humans are the only animals who carry leprosy. And does it seem like other animals would carry that? Do we know how many diseases cross both species? Some armadillos are known to carry leprosy. That is typically going to be the 9-banded armadillo, which is the only species found in the southern part of North America. Everybody else is in Central and South America. And leprosy is not a huge concern with the dwarf screaming hairy armadillos, but it is something that we do test for occasionally just to be safe. Other zoos will test their species of armadillo to be safe, but it's not something that we're super worried about with him. Now, typically leprosy, in order to contract it, you would actually have to consume a part of the infected animal. I believe still humans and armadillos are the only ones who can have it. I have not heard of others having it, but there are animals who are susceptible to things like colds, flus. I believe primates are probably one of the biggest concerns because other primates that are not human can get a lot of the same types of illnesses we can. They can get a lot of the same types of genetic illnesses we can. So that's always something to watch out for as well. Are there other armadillos at the zoo? Jovi is our only one. These armadillos are solitary. Most species of armadillo are solitary. They prefer to be on their own unless it is breeding season or a mom raising her babies. So he gets a house all to himself. And let's see, armadillos are one of the few non-humans to get leprosy / Hansen's disease. Yes, they are the only ones that I am aware of, but I would need to double check myself on that in case there are any others. But as far as I know, armadillos are the only ones. We, though, just in case you missed it, we are wearing our masks because armadillos are one of the species identified as being susceptible to different types of coronavirus, including COVID-19. Molly and I have no reason to believe that we have COVID-19, but everybody on our staff is being extra careful because we have anteaters, armadillos, tamanduas, who are lesser anteaters, large cat species, all of whom are susceptible to COVID-19. So we do wear these special masks anytime we're around them. Question, what does his back feel like to the touch, soft or rough? His back is a combination of both. So it's kind of like a very thick fingernail in terms of the texture of it, but it is a little bit flexible so that he can move around, and it feels kind of rough and bumpy. So if you have ever had your nails get a little bit rough and weird, like when you've accidentally torn one, they can feel a little bit strange, or if you've ever lost a fingernail and that new one's growing back in, it does get a little bit bumpy and weird feeling. He also, though, has little hairs, so kind of a hairy, thick, squishy fingernail is the best description I have for it. And we have a live question from Maya and Ben, so we will let them turn on their camera.
Hello.
Hello.
Thanks, this is great. We had a question about the tail, which is, does it serve any purpose or is it just for fun?
Great question. So it does serve a little bit of a purpose, not necessarily a big one necessarily. Armadillos don't have the best balance. They're not the most graceful animals out there, but they do stand up on their hind legs and they will need to occasionally climb low rocks or fallen trees, things like that. So the tail is good for them to be able to balance and not fall over. For this particular armadillo, he has not done it that I have seen just yet. He likes to stand up on his hind legs a lot to be able to get a better view of what's around him. Most armadillos don't have the best eyesight, so being able to stand up and get just a little bit taller, get your head farther off the ground since they are so close to the ground, that can sometimes help you spot any danger or spot a potential food source. So your tail is like a tripod to help you balance.
Great, thanks.
Absolutely, great question, thank you. And I don't see any others just yet in the chat. I know we're getting very close to the end of our time here, so I wanted to check in with our moderators and see what you would like us to do as far as whether or not you'd like us to go ahead and wrap up.
I think we should just wrap up now, and we'll have a brief little interlude, and then we'll have time for a few more questions. So I don't know if you have any closing thoughts you want to say, but we'll come back to you with some questions in a couple minutes, okay?
Absolutely, that would be great. As far as closing thoughts, just for this moment in time, we do appreciate all of you spending some time with us this morning, learning a little bit more about what we do as a zoological organization, as a conservation organization, and we hope you have a better understanding of the purpose of zoos and how we do things. We do make sure that these animals get the absolute best care possible. We want to ensure that their lives are the best they can possibly be from the moment they are born until the moment they pass. Or if they are animals that were not born here, we give them the best quality of life possible for the duration of their lifetime. And they are respected. They are ambassadors for their species. They are here because some of them, unfortunately, cannot exist safely in the wild. So there are a number of species of animal that are only around because of zoos. Others serve as a wonderful educational animal for people who will never get to see them in the wild and who hopefully will be inspired to help us in our mission of protecting them. So we hope you've learned a little bit more about that today. And if you have any questions that you think of as a result of that, definitely let us know in just a little bit. And I think before we go to our break here, Layla has a live question. Hello, Layla.
Hi. Does he have a shell on his back?
He kind of does. It's not quite like the turtle shell that we just saw a little bit ago. But that shell of his is adapted to be able to protect him, kind of like the turtle shell. But his belly is very, very soft. So his shell doesn't wrap all the way around him. It's just on his back. And it is kind of almost slinky looking. So it looks a little bit like a slinky or like a pill bug if you've ever seen one of those little roly-polies. And it is something that will keep him safe, just like a turtle shell. Sure. And I will switch back to our other camera. So Molly's going to pick our friend up here, and we're going to do a close-up look. So I'll step out of the way, and she'll bring him in. There's a nice close-up view of our armadillo. His nose is always working. There's his armored back. And armadillo, or armadillo in Spanish, does mean little armored one, which is very appropriate because they do look like they're wearing a suit of armor.
And you can see some of those hairs that Brittany was mentioning along his belly, on his underside, his great claws for digging as well. So hopefully you got a great view. And we can see if there were other questions while he adjusts himself. There was a question in the chat. Does he have any games he likes? So that's a great question. Here at the zoo, we probably call animal games enrichment. Enrichment is going to be anything that's going to be new and exciting for an animal or something that they don't get every day, something our zookeepers can change up in their habitat or throughout their day to make it more stimulating for them or for them to have ways to exhibit natural behaviors. So where Joby was, his little hexagon, and I'll actually put him back since it looks like he is ready to move again. So in his little hexagon, he doesn't get that space every day. This is actually the first time we've set it up like this in the health center. So he gets new places to explore. He has tunnels he can go through. He actually, in his main habitat, he has a little wheel. So you might be familiar with rat wheels or hamster wheels. We have one that's big enough for Joby to exercise and run on. So those would probably be games for him. Other games would probably be his training sessions, like you saw with Larry. Joby is target trained similarly to Larry, and in a different way. He has a different target stick, different behaviors we ask him to do. But those would probably be animal games. And I don't see other questions in the chat. So
Thanks so much, you guys. That was really interesting. And we're going to have a very brief musical interlude with just some images from the society. And this is our chance to ask people if you are inclined to make a donation. We'd be so grateful. We appreciate a donation of $5, but I would really appreciate anything. And during this period, if you want to collect your thoughts and ask some questions, I know we already have a few sort of more general questions for Molly and Brittany, and we'll come back to those after this brief break. Thanks. So welcome back, and thanks for those of you who made a donation. We're grateful. We rely on donations to keep, well, I was going to say the doors open, but they're not. So the camera's on, I guess. So there's a bunch of sort of more general questions for you guys. So I'm going to start with, what's the coolest piece of technology in the care facility?
So I can take that one, I guess. I mentioned earlier, for certain animals that are too large to come to our health center behind us, that they get procedures done in their night houses or off habitat areas. And so what's really cool is that we can have portable ultrasound machines or portable x-rays that go to our larger animals. And we have trained for our giraffes. I know we've trained to have them place their hoof on an x-ray to get x-rays of that. We can place it on different body parts, and they're trained to stand still for that and get rewards that way. For our elephant who was pregnant, we can get that portable ultrasound to her to monitor her pregnancy as well. So that's probably the coolest thing. There's lots of stuff in here that I probably don't even know what it does, but that's probably a really cool thing we can do.
And I'll take the next one. What special care do veterinarians give to newborn animals? So typically we allow the parents to take care of the newborns themselves. We want them to be raised by their parents as much as possible. So we try to stay very hands-off. These are still wild animals. We want to respect them as wild animals, and we want to allow them the opportunity to have all of those natural behaviors that mom or dad or both would teach to them. However, I'm going to turn our camera just slightly here and try and point it out if I step back just a little bit. So right in the back corner of the room, I'm going to use my finger to kind of come in. So right below my fingertip, that is actually our NICU for animals. So that is an area where we do have specialized incubators. We have some of the warming tubs that we need. So if we do have newborn animals that are struggling or that mom or dad cannot take care of, whatever the case may be, we do have the ability to set them up in there, keep them warm, keep them comfortable, and we can monitor them 24/7 if we need to in order to make sure that they stay safe.
All right, the next question in the chat is, how many animals in a collection are usually related, and what's the largest family at the zoo? So in terms of being related, it just depends on if we have solitary or social animals. So I would say most of our social animals are related. That's just a kind of an estimate. I don't really know a percentage, but most of the social ones can be related. And then what's the largest family at the zoo? It's probably an animal you don't think of. I would say it's our hissing cockroach collection. So we have a colony of Madagascar hissing cockroaches in the Animal Ambassador collection. And it's a self-sustaining colony, so they do breed and reproduce. There's probably about, at any time, between 30 to 60 individuals.
And the next question, how is the zoo funded and what is your biggest area of need right now? So we are now a privatized nonprofit organization. We were for a while actually run jointly by our nonprofit zoological society and the local city of Tucson. So we used to receive a fair bit of our funding from the city and no longer do. So as a nonprofit, we do rely a lot on donations and all sorts of different fundraising. So that's pretty critical for us. But we also can receive grants as a nonprofit. So our education department, we are very fortunate for the local schools to be receiving grant funding to allow them to have free programming. So that way they are not having to pay, and we are also still getting revenue to be able to keep us employed and make sure that everybody is well taken care of. Other sources of funding, I'm trying to think if there's any other major source of funding that we might have. I think that's kind of it for us. So we do rely on our community, on donations, and on grants. And biggest area of need, similar to many other zoos, biggest area of need is always going to be animal care. They are very, very expensive, but they're absolutely 100% worth it. Our food budget alone, just to give you an idea, is upwards of $300,000 every single year. And that doesn't always cover all of the things that we need. So we will get donations, or we will find money elsewhere to be able to provide some of the extra food that animals might require. They might suddenly come up with some new medical condition that requires a specialty food item. Or if they're very picky animals, which we do have, they will decide that they only like the absolute best choices and cuts of meat. So that's something that we always set aside some money for as well. We are very fortunate in that we have been able to maintain our staff, our animals, and we are still, as of right now, able to continue to do that thanks to a sales tax that was passed in our community. But animal care is always going to be probably the biggest source of all of our funding.
All right, the next question is a pretty easy one. So where is the location of our zoo? We are located in Tucson, Arizona, which is in the Sonoran Desert of Arizona.
And the next question, where is the snake Blake from? I do not know.
That's Blake.
Oh, Flake, okay. So Flake, sorry. It is very hard to sometimes get those sounds across. We apologize for that. So Flake, named after a corn flake, is, he was hatched at, I believe, another facility and came to us with his sister. So a lot of times we do get our animals from other zoos. Sometimes they might be rescues from local organizations. So in our ambassador department, because we have some domesticated species, we do try and work with local rescue groups. And very, very rarely do animals come from the wild. And those situations are need-based situations. So animals that were in a very bad situation that had to have a home, or they may not have survived. So that is rare, but it does happen.
All right, the next question is, which animal is the most difficult for your vets to examine and why? So this is an interesting question. In my thought, it would probably be one of our more dangerous animals, just because it takes a long time for our zookeepers to get them trained up, for our animals to be comfortable getting another person in to see them. So for example, with some of our lions, we do training through a fence. So it's for large animals, it's always going to have a protective barrier between the animals unless they are immobilized or anesthetized in here. And so it can take months to train an animal to be comfortable enough with their zookeeper to allow the zookeeper to bring in another person. So for example, again, with our lions, they were trained to they're trained for a blood draw from their tail. And our veterinarian and our vet technician can do that. It took a long time though to get our lions comfortable with laying down, with having someone touch their tail lightly, and then having them poke their tail lightly with a needle, and then sit there long enough to have that needle get the blood. So it takes a long time for those types of things. So that's probably the most difficult thing for our vets to do.
And then questions about which animal is our favorite. I would say this is maybe just a general favorite question. So I do have a number of different animals that I am very, very fond of, but I would say that cheetahs, fennec foxes, and horses are probably in my very, very top of animals that I absolutely adore.
And my favorite animal is, actually I have two. So one I've never actually seen is an okapi, and it looks like a cross between a horse, a giraffe, and a zebra. So that's a really interesting animal. And my other favorite is probably sea turtles.
And then let's see. In my backyard, we get skunks. Any advice? You know, I don't have a ton of experience with skunks, so I am not sure what they would be averse to. I do know that for a number of prey species, there are different types of granules, so pellets or kind of a sandy type texture that you can buy that is soaked in fox urine. So that can be found at local hardware stores. It is safe. It's not a pesticide or an herbicide or anything like that that would be harmful to the environment. But fox urine is a very powerful deterrent for animals such as skunks, rabbits, squirrels, some of the smaller animals, and even occasionally deer. So something as large as a deer may avoid fox urine. And I believe there are also some places that sell things that have been treated or soaked with coyote urine. So that would be very startling to a prey animal. So I would recommend something like that that's a more natural repellent. But I don't know if skunks potentially are dismissive of something like that.
Right, the next question is, how has the zoo been handling visitors during COVID? So our facility was shut down or closed due to orders, and we remained closed for about 6 months, I believe. And when we reopened, and still currently, we have a reduced capacity of visitors that are allowed in our facility. So I believe it's less than half of our normal amount are allowed in every day. We also require masks for our visitors unless you are actively eating or drinking. And we, right now, unfortunately, we're not taking any school groups into our facility. So we do have classrooms here, but we don't have any of our enclosed spaces open. So most of our facility is outdoors and open air, but we do have a couple buildings, so those are closed. We also have a few extra barricades in front of certain animals, so guests have to remain a little bit farther back. Brittany mentioned for our armadillo, certain species are more susceptible to COVID, so we want to make sure they have a little bit more space between people. And we also have higher cleaning every day. So we have our guest ambassador or guest services ambassadors who go throughout the zoo every hour and wipe down our guardrails, clean the bathrooms every hour, and clean other high touch areas. So those are our main adjustments for COVID.
And the next question, which is a great one for any of the young watchers who are interested in the animal fields. Did you train to be vets? What would you tell my children? And I hope I'm pronouncing these correctly, Anand and Reina, to study if they want to do what you do. And thank you for the compliment that we are amazing. We appreciate you very much. We did not train to be vets. One of the really great things about being able to get into this side of animal care is that we both have backgrounds in biological sciences that are a little bit more diverse. So veterinary training is absolutely incredible. It's a valuable skill to have, even if you don't want to be a vet. But for both of us, my background at least is in animal science, specifically equines, which is not something you would always think would translate to a zoo, but it worked very well in my favor and was one of the things that gained me my internship here at the zoo. And I did the internship, so I volunteered here. I volunteered at the farm that is attached to our local university, the University of Arizona. I worked with horses there. I had a lot of other animal experience. And I think I would say most people who get into this field biological sciences, ecology, those kinds of sciences are the absolute best ones to look into, because you want to have a solid background and a solid foundation in this type of work, in this type of field. Science is ever evolving, but it's something that you want to have a really good grasp on if you are going to be working with other living things, since biology is the study of living things. And if you wanted to be an educator like us, you can sometimes also go into the side of science-based or informal education as well, and kind of come from that perspective. I would always encourage you to work hard. Staying in school is an important one. I know you're probably going to hear that a lot, but most AZA facilities like ours, so Association of Zoos and Aquariums accredited facilities, do require a bachelor's degree or an associate's degree with related experience in order to be eligible to be hired. So if you have that bachelor's degree, that's a great start. And then start looking at places where you can volunteer, look at different things you can do with animals, and show your passion to the people you work with, make those really important connections with people. Those are definitely some of my recommendations, and I'm sure Molly has more to add to that.
Yeah, I think Brittany mentioned it really well. So my background's a little bit different, but pretty similar to hers. And so again, just getting that experience, making sure you're really passionate about it, because that comes into play a lot. Zookeepers have a very tough job, and veterinarians do especially too. It's very time demanding and can be very draining, and so you have to be prepared for that. Lots of people think it's a cool job, but then they realize all the work that goes into it, and they kind of back away from it, which is totally okay. But again, that passion has to be there. And it looks like our moderator is telling we have to wrap up questions. You guys had such great questions. We could talk all day, but we want to respect your time as well. So PD, if you can lead us out, I guess.
Sure. Thanks so much. You guys, I'm going to repeat the last statement here, which is both of you are amazing. That was just really great. And I'm really grateful for what you're doing and your capacity to share it with us. So thank you so much. It was from David Attenborough, who's a very famous British naturalist and nature educator connector. And I don't have his pithy quote, but I strongly encourage you, if you're interested in this topic, to look up David Attenborough and his new series he's been working on. And I think he and Jacques Cousteau before him are the kind of communicators that I think we all benefit from, in addition to our local zoos. Thanks for your time.